Our big questions for this half of the chapter are, how are sex lives shaped by biology and society, and how has sexual behavior changed in the last 50 years? So to begin with, how are sex lives shaped by biology and society? And one of the first things that your book brings up is sexual orientation, which is defined as referring to whether individuals are attracted to members of the other sex, the same sex, or both. And of course, today the terms that we use, the most common ones, are heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual, but not everyone fits into those categories. We've also come up with other terms such as asexual and pansexual, but even still, some people reject those labels. And it's the idea, again, where we are trying to categorize people, and we aren't always so great at that. One of the first major attempts to talk, well, maybe not even major, the first attempt to talk about this was in the late 1800s or so, and that's where the terms heterosexual, homosexual, and bisexual come from. They are actually relatively recent terms. Anything you are reading that uses the terms homosexual, heterosexual, or bisexual, that was written before 1890 or so, has been inserted later. Those words did not exist before then. So keep that in mind if you're reading older stuff. Simply because we didn't understand things in the exact same terms and concepts that we use today. So these terms and ideas of an orientation are somewhat new. Alfred Kinsey was probably the first main systematic person to approach studying sexuality, and he was not really a sociologist or a sex researcher or anything like that. He started off as an entomologist, but he quickly realized right after he got married, in fact, the story kind of goes that he and his wife almost got divorced because the sex was just so horrible. But they quickly realized it was so horrible because, one, they've never been taught how to have good sex, and they weren't really talking to each other about it. And so he kind of had this idea of, if we don't talk about this stuff and we don't ever, research it to figure out what's going on and what people are doing, then how will we ever, really know what kind of disservice are we doing, perhaps for young married couples? He quickly became fairly popular on his campus, almost like it was a, come to me for advice if you're having trouble, almost like the first sex therapist. And he turned that into a large research study. He first published, I forget the exact name of it, but it was on the sexual behavior of men or something like that. And 5 or 6 years later, he came out with the volume of women. But the release of his on the sexual behavior of men actually shocked the hell out of America. This was released in 1950, in the early 1950s. When we are thinking about the picture of sexuality and sexual behavior in the 1950s, what do we picture? What does 1950s America look like in terms of sex? Not a whole lot of it, maybe, okay. What else?
In the bedroom under the sheet.
Okay. What else?
That was to have babies.
Okay, so yeah, 1950s America was very literally the mom, dad, 2.5 kids, white picket fence kind of picture, right? This is June Cleaver's America from Like Leave It to Beaver. This was the picture of America at that time. We are getting the first sort of waves of the baby boom and still riding the return to normalcy after World War II. Everything was sort of picture perfect, suburbia, yada, yada, yada. Well, when Kinsey released his research, what do you think it said? That yes, this is the picture of America and this is how everyone's doing things? No. The picture of sexuality and sex in 1950s America was that it happens within marriage and it's for procreation and yada, yada, yada. What Kinsey's research showed is that 75% of American men had engaged in sexual relations before marriage. So 79% of men had had premarital sex of some form. 38% of men admitted to gaining orgasm at least once with a member of the same sex. And at least, I think it was 42% of men, somewhere in there, had admitted to at least one occurrence of an extramarital affair. This was not the picture of America that everyone had in their heads. A few years later, I don't remember the exact percentages of the study on women, but he found similar results there too. So obviously, one thing that came out of his research is the picture that we present of our sex lives in public is very, very little in relation to what actually happens. So the other thing that came out of his study was the idea of a fluid sexuality, or sexuality existing on a spectrum. What Kinsey came up with after decades of research was the idea of a scale from 1 to 6. 1 being completely heterosexual, 6 being completely homosexual, and then of course the numbers in between. And from all of his talking to people and research, he came to the conclusion that those categories that we know as strictly heterosexual, strictly homosexual, or strictly 1s and strictly 6s, are kind of false dichotomies. They don't actually exist. They make us feel better. We kind of categorize ourselves that way, but it's not an actual natural categorization. Instead, he postulated that it seems there is sort of a natural sexuality, somewhere where we fall on this spectrum, but most people are really somewhere in the 2 to 5s. That we're all a little bit one way or the other, a little bit of combination of both. And it is only social pressure that causes us to conform. And the reason he says this is, let's say, and I'm going to go ahead and label this straight and this gay to sort of remind you. Let's say, and here's our strictly in the middle of bi people with our current terms. If someone falls right here, what social pressure would they face? Maybe. I mean, this is a person who, according to Kinsey's nomenclature, is primarily straight. Maybe a little bit gay in that they might think of someone of the same sex occasionally, or maybe there's only 1 or 2 people of the same sex that might get their attention. So in that case, what would be the major pressure that that person is facing from society in terms of societal messages and what is normal, what is right, all that sort of stuff? Yeah, they would most likely polarize this way. If someone is, say, right here, what social pressures would that person face? This is someone, maybe a 4.5 or a 5, who is primarily gay, naturally in Kinsey's nomenclature. What pressures would they face? There would definitely be an overall sort of social pressure from society to go that way. But if you're on this end of it, what other pressures might you feel? Right. I mean, if you are hanging out in sort of a gay crowd, there are going to be pressures, a much smaller pressure, of course, to polarize towards gay, because unfortunately bisexual people kind of get the short end of the stick from both communities. Straight people are kind of weirded out by them, gay people are kind of weirded out by them too. So there is pressure to polarize on both sides. So Kinsey postulated those that actually admit to being bi are probably squarely there in the middle and have been able to resist social pressure in either direction. But his main idea is that sexuality is a spectrum and much more fluid than most of us admit. And again, it's only because of social pressure and that tendency to categorize that we come up with these categories. And he called them false dichotomies. He didn't actually believe in people being completely straight or completely gay. Follow up from Kinsey that have tried to sort of replicate this, replicate his numbers. We've had all kinds of different results because, as you can imagine, this is one area of social science research that is incredibly hard to study. Why is it incredibly hard to study? Yes, people will lie. Kinsey came up with a incredibly complicated anonymity scheme where we ask questions in a certain way and record data in a certain way so that people, there would be no chance that their answers could be traced back to them, but still, if you're sitting across the table from someone and we are asking you questions about this stuff, most people probably aren't going to be 100% truthful. So it is an incredibly difficult area to research. So we've got results all over the place. The other terms that we've come up with outside of this category, your book doesn't specifically mention them, but asexuals is the idea that you don't really have much of a desire for sex at all. So, and then pansexual is the taking into consideration the whole of the person. Sort of the personality, you look at people and not gender. So gender doesn't really factor into the equation at all. Our follow-up studies have shown that behavior, who one has sex with, or which sex one has sex with, attraction, which sex one is attracted to, and identity, whether we identify as lesbian, bisexual, heterosexual, gay, whatever the case may be, are not always consistent or parallel, which is incredibly confusing because what do you call someone who, say, is a woman that has sex with women but can also love men but has sex with women more but considers herself to be straight? These things aren't always parallel, which brings us to talk about another spectrum. This one is affectional orientation. And we've come up with sexual attraction, sexual orientation rather, is the behavior. Affectional orientation refers to what gender an individual can fall in love with. This is sometimes used to the idea that love and sex are different things, and that you can fall in love with someone, or in this case, a gender, and not have sex with them. But you can also have sex with someone, or in this case, a gender, and not necessarily love them. It's the idea that our behavior doesn't always run parallel with our emotions, doesn't always run parallel with our identity. So it's the idea that these are separate things. For example, when I was working in neuropsych, one of my clients, he actually came in because he was having trouble reading and he thought he had an undiagnosed reading disorder. But you spend 3 months going through a neuropsychological assessment with someone, you end up talking. And the way he described himself is he's currently engaged. He's been engaged for 2 months. His girlfriend and he have been dating for a year and a half now. But he's had sex with men in the past. He's completely okay with having sex with men. But he could never fall in love with a man. He loves his girlfriend. They have awesome sex. It's a great relationship. He's been completely monogamous. She's been completely monogamous. She is totally aware of his entire history. Yada, yada, yada. What is his orientation? I hear bi from one person. Agree? Disagree?
I don't
Others?
know about agree, but I'm not sure I disagree either.
Okay.
Well, if he's being married and plan on being anonymous, then he have to be heterosexual now. And maybe he was bi.
I don't think you.
If it weren't for this relationship, he can have sex with a guy tomorrow, kind of. It honestly, to him, it doesn't matter what gender you are when it comes to sex, but he doesn't love guys. He considered himself straight because he could never see himself in a relationship with someone of the same sex. Yeah, he can have sex with one or the other, it didn't really matter. But he could never sort of picture himself loving a guy. That was just weird. But it illustrates that for some people, yeah, maybe thinking in terms of behavior is a little too limiting. Our ideas of orientations and what they mean today is more than just behavior. Pretty much everything to do with people is more than just behavior. If we classify people only on their behavior in other areas, that would be kind of, we would never get the full picture. So it's the idea that maybe that is just a little bit too limiting. These ideas also show up in popular culture. I visit a conference tour.
I think people, it depends on what they grow up finding out. I think it's a choice later in life, but it depends on upbringing. When did you choose to be straight? That's a good call, man. I didn't choose to be. So boring.
I don't know if people would choose to be gay, so I think it's a mixture, maybe possibly of of nature and nurture, so to speak, and where their comfort level was all their life and everything.
When did you choose to be straight?
When did I choose? I don't know if it was a choice for me. It just was born that way.
Do you think it's the same for gay people?
I think so, probably. Yeah, I do.
That's not a choice at all, from their perspective.
Have you talked to anyone about it?
Sure, and they say there's differences in their brains. They're just born that way. If they were going to choose a lifestyle, that's not one they would have chosen. It's too difficult.
When did you choose to be straight?
I don't know, junior high, puberty, I guess. I'm not sure.
So you remember making a choice?
I guess not really.
Do you think it's the same for gay people?
Probably, but they don't really choose, it just kind of happens. I'm not sure if it's necessarily a choice, but at the same time, I'm not totally certain that you're born one way or another. I think it has a lot to do with development.
Did you decide your sexuality?
That's a good point. I don't think I did.
You think it's the same for gay people?
I don't know. You might have a very good point.
Gay or choose to be gay. I think there are some of both. But I think someday they'll discover there's a genetic predisposition to homosexuality.
I just wonder if animals choose their sexuality. I don't think they choose. I don't think humans choose.
Who are gay?
Absolutely. That's my opinion.
I think it's a bit of both, actually. I think that you feel it, or you're also, I think, confused, and you're not sure. And so your environment just plays a big role in that.
When did you choose to be straight?
I don't know. Never thought about that.
Do you think it's the same for gay people?
Probably.
Do you think people are born gay or choose to be gay?
I would have to say they would choose to be gay.
When did you choose to be straight?
I never thought about it. I am who I am.
Do you think it's the same for gay people?
Maybe that's true.
Okay. So what do we think of that?
I think that just proves the point.
And what point does that prove?
You don't choose either way. You don't ever make a conscious decision. I'm going to sleep with a female. I'm going to sleep with a male. I don't necessarily think there to be a sort of. I think there are plenty of people born gay, but I also think you're right that it's about your upbringing and it's about a lot of things. It's just not just one thing that's going to decide if my kids are gay or straight.
Okay. Any other thoughts or agree, disagree? What's he saying?
What's your opinion?
On the next slide, we'll get there as far as what research says so far. All right. So what do we know about sexual orientation from research? Again, this is one of those incredibly complicated areas that is difficult to study. But we do see some interesting trends. There is evidence that both biology and society have their effects. We do know some things from genetics. And our genetic research is conducted by studying twins and comparing them to regular siblings. So what we do is we have like a regular brother-brother or sister-sister pairing. So just regular siblings, maybe at different ages, whatever the case may be. Then we look at fraternal twins, which would be two children born at the same time but from different eggs, so they share the prenatal environment. And then we look at identical twins, which are two children born at the same time, but they are genetically identical because they come from the same split egg. When we do this, if homosexuality or sexuality in general is completely controlled by our genetics, then we should see that our identical twins should have the same sexual orientation 100% of the time, because they are genetically identical, so if something is completely genetic, they should be 100%. And then we would see that these should probably match about the same percent of the time, whatever that percent is, because fraternal twins are no more genetically alike than regular siblings. Okay? So that's the pattern we should see if it is completely genetic. Is that the pattern that we see? What do you think? I heard one answer. No, it's not the pattern that we see. The pattern that we do see is something like, and don't quote me on these numbers because I don't remember them 100%. It's something like this. Far more often than not, identical twins do share the same sexual orientation. If one is straight, the other is straight. If one is bi, the other is bi. If one is gay, the other is gay. About 92, 93% of the time. Not 100% of the time, but pretty darn close. Fraternal twins follow up with somewhere in the 60 to 70% range, and then regular siblings are about 30 to 45% of the time. So this is a pretty strong indication that there is something genetic going on. Because if there were no genetic influences anywhere, then everything would be left up to chance. But the fact that the more identical you are, the more often than not you share the same sexual orientation, says that there has got to be at least something genetic going on here. But the fact that this isn't 100% means that genetics isn't the entire question. So, again, from this, there does seem to be some evidence that points towards genetics because of our twin studies. And we've done these studies on both men and women, and we find similar patterns among both men and women. But there's something else that they draw attention to. This group, our fraternal twins, is lower than our identical twins, so that's probably because of the genetic differences. But they are still higher than our regular siblings. What does this group share that this group doesn't? The prenatal environment. This brings up another interesting trend that we see that only happens in men but not in women. We don't know why it happens. I'll tell you one of the theories of why it happens after I tell you what the trend is. But they're running a follow-up study now to see if they can pin down the mechanism. But the trend that we see when we look, from a big picture, lots and lots of people, lots and lots of families, is that the more male children a woman has, the likelihood that those later children will be gay increases dramatically. So if you're like the fourth, fifth, or sixth son, your chances of being gay are pretty high up there. Now, one of the thoughts of why this happens is because of androgens, that a woman carrying a male fetus, the body somewhat sees that male fetus as a foreign body, and as she has more male children, her body gets better at quote-unquote feminizing it, or tamping down on those androgens. We don't know if that is true, that is a theory. Again, they're following up to try to figure that out. But that is kind of a weird little quirk when you think about it. It doesn't mean that, if you have 7 sons, that 7th one is for sure 100% going to be gay. But it's somewhere up in like the 70 or 80% statistically. The more sons that a woman has, the higher the chance they are of being gay. That pattern doesn't hold for women, though. And then the other question is there anything in our social experience that could sort of influence us one way or the other? Again, research here is a little bit more murky, but it kind of goes back and supports a lot of what Kinsey said. It's the strength of the social pressure. What messages do you get in your environment and things like that. Most of our research points to the point that social pressure is never really going to be enough to completely turn someone one way or the other. But what it does impact is how honest we are with ourselves and what behavior we actually express. Okay? So that's sort of the basic rundown. There has been a ton of research around all this stuff. This is barely just skimming the surface, but for the most part, we kind of agree with Kinsey, at least in some aspects. Some parts of the field think that Kinsey was too narrow, that spectrum is bigger, that sexuality is much more nebulous and you can't even put it on a spectrum. But there do seem to be effects of both genetics and social environment, and maybe even a prenatal environment to a certain extent. But yeah, there's no one explanation that fits all people. Any overall questions about any of that? Okay. We then start to talk about sexual behavior in general. This question is, how do biology and society affect other aspects of sexual behavior? And the question that your book asks is, do men like casual sex more than women? And if so, is this because of some biological or social difference? So what do you think? Do men like casual sex more than women?
No.
And if so, why? So I hear a no automatically.
Probably not like it, but I think it's not socially acceptable for men to have casual sex.
Okay.
I know plenty of women who really like to have casual sex.
Okay.
Which is
I heard the start of someone saying something. So let me say it. Let me think. Okay. Are there potential reasons, biological reasons, that this could be the case? If we assume that yes, it is the case.
I think it's more like more socially acceptable for a guy to have casual sex than a woman. Kind of like, was it last week or something like that we were talking about, like, a guy is considered
A player versus the girl being a slut?
slut.
Yes. And that is actually, what we call the double standard of sexuality in our social explanations. The idea that we judge women much more harshly for the same behavior than we do men. It makes it more socially acceptable for men to engage in casual sex. That's the social side of the equation. That, yeah, women are judged much more harshly for it usually. From a biological perspective, evolutionary explanations would say that, well, maybe genes that help women to produce offspring that survive would be carried in women today, while genes that help men produce offspring that survive would be carried in men today. And when we look at the biological differences between men and women, and think way back to like the hunter-gatherer days of our species, if you were in a very small community such as that, what are your primary concerns? Possibly finding a mate, which that ties into what concern? Yeah, the continued survival of your group, right? You're going to need food, some sort of shelter, and you want to survive long enough to create viable offspring so your community continues, right? In terms of value, which gender do you think is more valuable to small societies like that in terms of procreation, women or men?
Yeah, and then get more offspring.
That is true, but does that make them more valuable to small societies?
well, you only need one man to create a bunch
Exactly.
of offspring.
Exactly.
You need a lot of women.
That's part of the evolutionary perspective. How often can a woman create a child?
About every 10 months.
About every 10 months or so, right? How often can a man contribute to creating a child?
About every 45 minutes.
Yeah. Give him a break, maybe a sandwich in between, according to our video from the other day, and then he's good to go again, right? So the idea is, it made sense, one, that women stayed behind, helped take care of the house, and men went out and did the dangerous stuff like hunting and catching stuff to eat and all that, because if you lost a woman, that is really damaging to a small community. That is, a child every 10 months that you lose. If you lose a couple of men as they go out and fight, the tiger and they get eaten, his buddies have to work a little bit harder to keep the same number of children being, produced in that village. So these are the evolutionary perspectives. That women are much more reproductively valuable because you have much more of an investment, a reproductive investment in women, because it takes them, on average, 10 months to produce a child. Men don't have that limitation, so we're not worth as much evolutionary. And so that, in theory, might be an evolutionary perspective. It makes sense for men to enjoy casual sex more. The whole age-old age-old adage of, we have to go spread our oats and everything. And why it's not so much for women, because women have a much higher investment in reproduction because it takes them longer to produce a child. Okay? So, in general behavior, that is a possible biological explanation, but then the double standard of sexuality is a possible social explanation. If you're going to be slut-shamed for doing it, you're much less likely to do so. And we have that double standard between men and women.
And it's also, women are more likely to, be committed, form bonds and want to be committed. More so than men, I think.
That goes back to what we were talking about during gender, though. That's a gender difference that we commonly hear, but is that really true, or is it exaggerated for effect?
But, I do know girls that like to kid around too, but it's just
Okay. The book then goes on to talk about sexual minorities, which refers to anyone who is not heterosexual or who is transgendered, having changed their sex or gender from what was assigned to them at birth. And so in this section of the book, your book is trying to explore that social experience, that social pressure that could impact people's behavior. Your book says to understand what it means to be a member of a sexual minority, let's follow Tom around. Tom is a hypothetical 17-year-old who has just recently begun to identify as gay. And they say if Tom is typical of the American guy, this is what he has experienced. He was first aware of attractions to other males at age 8. He first knew the meaning of the term homosexual at 10. He first applied the term homosexual to his own attractions at 13. First had some sort of sexual contact with another male at 14, but didn't actually think of himself as gay until 17. He won't tell any of his friends until 18, and he won't tell his family until 19. Which raises the question of if he was first aware of attractions to other males at 8, why did it take him 11 years to square that with his identity? Okay. Any other thoughts?
maybe he himself had become comfortable with it.
Okay. That took him in theory, what, 9 years? And what your book talks about is that social pressure, but they call it heteronormative pressure, heteronormativity. And heteronormativity is a situation where the culture and institutions send the message that everyone is heterosexual, or at least this is the only normal way to be. So think about those social narratives we were talking about the other day, the man's job and the woman's job. He has to get a good job and take care of his family. She, in theory, is supposed to find a good man to marry and take care of her, and then, take care of the family. But let's expand that a little bit to talk about most of the social messaging and entertainment and media and stuff that we get. So these are all the hypothetical experiences that Tom might have had growing up. He listens to rock music, and most of the songs are about sex or romances between men and women. The plots of most television shows and movies feature romances or sexual escapades between men and women. In high school, bias against gays abounds. His male friends frequently insult each other with fag, or he hears that's so gay. He was never on the receiving end of these insults and doesn't want to be, so he doesn't want to tell people at his high school that he's gay. At his family's church, nothing is said pro or con about homosexuality, but a friend of his who belongs to a more conservative church says that his preacher talks about the evils of being gay from the pulpit. The only weddings Tom has ever heard about are between a man and a woman, and he's never met a married couple consisting of 2 men or women. He has heard that gay marriage is legal in a few states, but knows that it's not in most, and he's not sure why, but he doesn't want to ask. And he certainly can't imagine gaining popularity and figures that he might actually invoke ridicule if he asks a boy to senior prom, if that would even be allowed in his school. And the thought is that this is pretty much a typical experience of growing up gay, lesbian, or bisexual in America. Most of the messaging you get is heteronormative. It either assumes that you are straight or wants to make you straight if you're not. Okay. The next question that your book kind of asks is, what is the potential impact of heteronormative messaging? Okay. what I have on the next slide is a video actually produced by a Mormon group. And this family was heavily involved in pushing for Proposition 8 in California. Anyone remember or know what Proposition 8 in California was?
That same-sex marriage.
What is that?
They have different rights.
The way the story went is same-sex marriage became legal in California. I want to say 2006 or so. And this was through the courts. Proposition 8 was in 2008, and it was a ballot initiative. It put a measure on the ballot for people to vote on that would amend the California Constitution to make gay marriage illegal. So gay marriage has been legal for a time. If Proposition 8 passed, it would re-ban gay marriage and make all those marriages invalid and take those marriage rights away. So this particular family was heavily involved in the campaign for Prop 8 to re-ban those marriages and take those rights away. Prop 8 did pass, but then that was one of the cases that was at the Supreme Court last year, and the Supreme Court threw it out. But this particular family, again, they are Mormons, and they were heavily involved in pushing for Prop 8. And then this happened.
Go for it, Ellen. Everybody take one.
Even from those very early moments, you have set expectations within your own mind of what you see your child growing up to be.
Looking back, it is amazing to me how many things I just explained away that now make so much sense.
It was really depressing to see my parents supporting something that was completely against what I was.
His parents hate gay people. His church hates gay people. And that's the message that was received. And that was what we had to overcome.
It was very confusing for me growing up Mormon and thinking now I have a son that's gay, like how does this fit? What I saw his life would be, what I expected his life to be, was now gone.
Our most important value as a church is the family. I was mortified at the idea of being disowned by my parents.
It's like, what's the point of my life? I didn't have answers.
I was thinking I would just get all the pillows, take them all at once, and die right then.
There's something not right with a 13-year-old having to think that. And we just talked and we said, Jordan, this changes nothing. I was like, you are perfect in my eyes, and I love you, and you're exactly the way I want you to be, and we'll figure this out.
Reading and hearing stories of parents throwing their kids out in my church and thinking that's what our church is telling them to do. That's not the church I was raised in. And it is not the God and the Christ that I believe in. This is not the end of the world. This is the beginning of your world. And how you're going to live that and the things that you're going to do are going to be magnificent.
Okay. Thoughts or reactions to that?
Oh, I get so frustrated when people use their religion to deny other people rights.
I mean, not only that. I mean, this was talking about the potential impact of heteronormative messaging or impulses. And that's kind of what this family was doing. They assumed all their kids are straight. They were involved in this campaign only to find out that their son almost commits suicide because he's gay and he gets the message that his parents will never accept him and they hate him. Which your book goes in to say that, yeah, some members of sexual minorities experience even worse things. Bullying, both physical and verbal, is fairly common. There are discrepancies in discrimination in hiring, as we've talked about before. If I'm an employer and I say I don't want to hire you because you're a man and I don't hire men, or you're a woman and I don't hire women, can I legally do that? No, I'm opening myself up for a pretty big lawsuit. If I say that I'm not hiring you because of your religion, I don't like that particular religion, can I do that? No. Again, opening myself up for a pretty big lawsuit. If I say that I don't want to hire you because you are too old and old people just aren't very great workers, can I do that? No. Can I say that I am not going to hire you because you are gay, lesbian, or bisexual and I don't like those people so I don't hire them? Yes, I absolutely can. There's no federal laws barring discrimination based on sexual orientation in hiring or housing. If I own an apartment building and I don't want to rent to gay people, I can refuse to rent on the basis of their sexual orientation without any repercussions. In most states, only 16 or 17 states have laws that bar discrimination on hiring discrimination on terms of sexuality. Arkansas isn't one of them. So it is completely legal to fire someone or not hire them or kick them out of housing based on their sexual orientation in Arkansas. According to surveys, approximately 40% of GLBT individuals have been threatened with violence and about 80% have been verbally harassed. And it brings up the terms heterosexism or homophobia, which is sometimes misunderstood because it's not really a fear of gay people, but terms that are used for any kinds of bias that is directed at a person because of their actual or perceived orientation. The idea that you don't actually have to be gay or lesbian to face this stuff, just someone has to think that you are. Probably as a result of these various forms of things that they face, gay and lesbian youth are 2 to 3 times as likely to commit suicide as heterosexual youth, and that number is actually higher for transgender youth. Okay, so despite this, there has been some change in movement as far as gay rights and gay visibility over the past few years, and anyone know what the biggest current debate in this arena is? What's it about? What's the big thing in the news about gay rights and all that sort of stuff? What's the current debate over?
Isn't it still illegal with marriage?
It's over same-sex marriage, yep. Anyone know where that debate currently is? Like, how many states it's legal in, how many it's not, things like that.
The last I heard it was being appealed because in Arkansas, they're issuing that.
In Arkansas specifically, the constitutional ban against same-sex marriage has been overturned at the circuit level. That one is being appealed. Yeah.
Indiana just went, okay, Missouri is working on it?
Missouri is kind of in the same category that we are, I think. But overall, I'm going to break it down a little bit more here in a second, but anyone have a number? The number of states where it's legal? Or do you want to take a guess?
21.
10, 18, 21, 8,
4.
4. This is something that changes almost daily. And let me see what the date of this is. I was updating this on October 27th. So it's October 27th. We're at 32 states plus DC, where same-sex marriage is legal. So everything that is in red, it is legal for marriage there. The gold color states are pro-marriage ruling at the appellate level, which the Supreme Court then neglected to hear. So those states will be coming along fairly soon. The red dashes, which is where Arkansas is that there's a pro-marriage court ruling, and there's further action pending. So it's been thrown out at one level, but it's been appealed. The states in the green means that there is a marriage ban in place, but a lawsuit challenging it has been filed. So there's literally no state where these things haven't been challenged. It's just where they are in the court process. So in your notes, you actually have some stuff in your book, but this is the one I put in your notes because it's much more up to date. The one in your book is from 2008. But I also actually have a video that shows you how quickly this issue has moved. And for a social issue, this one has moved pretty quickly. Let's see if I can actually hit and launch it. Because the way this works is it's going to slowly scroll through and give you the date at the top. We're starting in 1996. These are states performing same-sex marriages. These are civil unions. And this third category over here is constitutional bans on same-sex marriage. So, again, starting in September 1996. I apparently paused in the recording a lot longer than I thought to give me time to explain that. Are we actually playing, or are you just sitting there? Where are we? Yeah. I'll try it from within PowerPoint once more, and then if PowerPoint decides to not cooperate. There it goes. So now in 2000, 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, and there's 2014, March, May, June, July, and then September, October, and then this ends on October 14th, I think. No, October 17th. And this has changed since then, even. So that was a span of, what, 20 or so years. And as far as social issues go, that's a pretty huge shift. Some of the polling over here is from your book, but I've given you the updated numbers. In 1996, 27% supported, 65% opposed. In 2009, it was 37% support, 54% opposed. And in 2014, we're at 55% support, 42 opposed, and then 4% no opinion. These numbers are from 2011, and this is an age breakdown, which shows that there is much more support in the younger generations than in the older generations.